Hey fellas, how's it going? So I have made it no secret on this channel that Wolverine is probably my favorite Marvel character. The short king with anger issues and a indestructible skeleton. The furry berserker. Weapon X, Patch, whatever you want to call him. He's been through the ringer over the years. I want to talk about some of his stories I always found the most interesting. The door for this video is well open for a part 2 down the road. So if you're also a fan of the Wolverine, feel free to leave me recommendations in the comments. With that out of the way, let's talk a little bit of history. Alright, so most of you probably know that Wolverine first appeared in an issue of The Incredible Hulk, issue 181 to be specific, where he is introduced as Canada's first and greatest superhero. And like most Canadians, he smells like cheap beer and moose urine. Oh, and the Wendigo is there too. But his appearance in this issue isn't what makes it valuable. And the first clear image of the guy we get is this one right here, where he looks like a little kid jumping out of a closet trying to scare you, making his best rawr face. I swear, I absolutely love this character. I just think the first version of the classic blue and yellow costume wasn't the best. And just some of the poses he strikes in this issue are classic. They're very memeable. I especially like the look of confusion on both Hulk and Wendigo's face when they see him. Like, what the hell is this short guy gonna do in the middle of our fight? I could just imagine Hulk going, "Oi mate, me and the albino here was having a right good slobber knocker, you hear? So piss off, you mangy runt." But that's not what happened, because the Hulk's not Australian or whatever the hell that accent was supposed to be. No, this is classic, almost child-minded version of the Hulk. The one who was considered impressive when he could pick up a particularly heavy train. Now the Hulk can punch through dimensions because power scalers smoke crack in their free time. Man, I am speedrunning making sure this video can never get monetized, huh? Anyway, after defeating the Wendigo, Wolverine pretty quickly turns on Hulk and the two start fighting. And this was meant to establish a long-term rivalry between the two, as Wolverine was apparently always intended to be a supporting character for the Hulk, and him becoming an X-Men was just Marvel's attempt to appeal to their Canadian audience. Even his claws were originally just part of his costume and not something that popped out of his body. While Marvel doesn't have the same problem with rebooting their continuity every 10 years the way DC does, they are known for having retcon upon retcon that often conflict and contradict one another. But I digress. Wolverine first joined the X-Men in Giant Size X-Men #1, appearing alongside Nightcrawler, Colossus, and Storm, 3 other fan favorites. And over the years, Wolverine has been a part of a ton of superhero teams, including the Avengers, Alpha Flight, and X-Force. And I do plan on covering the Uncanny X-Force run at some point, so keep an eye out for that video, because that's going to be a treat. There was even a very brief period of time where Wolverine joined the new Fantastic Four, fighting alongside Ghost Rider, Grey Hulk, and Spider-Man. Now, none of these guys typically get along that great. Grey Hulk does have a soft spot for Spider-Man, but other than that, this team was pretty much doomed to fall apart as soon as it started, and was pretty much just a marketing gimmick to get Fantastic Four sales back up. But I've always been a fan of Wolverine doing his lone wolf thing. He's great on a team and has a lot of good rapport with most of the other X-Men, especially Nightcrawler and Colossus. And the Uncanny X-Force might be my second favorite superhero team of all time. But when he's written correctly, Wolverine has so much charisma, and as powerful as he is, he's still a lot more relatable than other superheroes tend to be. And I 100% plan on covering the Wolverine Origins run, which was released after the Wolverine Origin story. The first solo run Wolverine had when he had his memories back. He wears both the brown and tan John Byrne costume and the classic blue and yellow, while carrying the Muramasa blade, which has a fragment of his soul in it, and nullifies the healing factor of regenerating characters. And it features Wolverine's bastard son Daken as one of the main villains of the run, and he's kind of a hit-or-miss character. Some people love him, some people hate him, I'm mostly indifferent. To me, he's kind of just like a weaker Sabretooth, with an ego that is backed by nothing because he loses pretty much every engagement with his dad he's ever had. But that is definitely a story for its own video. That run is really good, I really liked it a lot. And if you disagree with me on that, I'm gonna tell Mom about your internet search history. So think about that, bucko. You guys have no idea how badly I want to like this story. How badly I want to tell you it's on par with Batman Year One and Daredevil the Man Without Fear. But it's not. It's really, really not. There is a film called X-Men Origins Wolverine that loosely adapts this story and covers all of the important parts in the first 5 minutes of a 90-minute runtime. And as bad as that movie is, trying to adapt this story scene for scene would have made it even worse. Because it is very boring. Wolverine is relegated to being a side character in his own origin story, and the only 2 things of value the story contributes to Wolverine's backstory is his fascination for red-headed women and his affinity for wolves. I guess you could argue Smitty gives him a book on the samurai, which might have been what got Logan interested in Japanese culture to begin with, but I do think that the reader could have inferred most of this on their own at some point. This just feels like a story that didn't need to be told, and only really exists as a marketing gimmick. We finally gave Wolverine his memories back, come see what happens next. And fine, he grew a lot as a character after he got his memories back, but they could have condensed most of the story into like 3 issues, not 6. It's so boring. And one thing that should also be noted is that unlike in the film version of Wolverine's origin, his half-brother Dog and Sabretooth are not the same person. Dog is actually a human, not a mutant. So the Logan we know was born as James Howlett, but was actually the son of Thomas Logan, the Howlett family's groundskeeper who you see on the screen right now, who is a dead ringer for what Logan grows up into. There's also a mysterious third brother, the firstborn son of Elizabeth Howlett, who is also implied to be Thomas Logan's. And like James, or the Wolverine we know, he was a mutant as well, meaning it was probably Elizabeth who carried the mutant gene, not Thomas Logan himself. Alright, so long story short, one night Thomas Logan gets extra drunk, breaks into the Howlett estate after being fired, and kills John Howlett in order to try to get Elizabeth to run away with him. Logan pops his claws for the first time and kills his biological father in order to avenge the man who raised him, and is henceforth disowned by the Howlett family, and he's given the name Logan by his friend Rose when they're on the run together, because nothing will help a traumatized child more than giving him the name of the first man he ever killed. What a wonderful lady. And then the rest of the story is Logan playing lumberjack in Canada, growing more fond of Rose, but she's grown to think of him as just a little brother. Tragedy ensues, Rose dies, and Logan runs off to play wolf in the woods. And everybody clapped. The end. You know what? That phrase has a whole nother meaning these days, doesn't it? This story does not actually end in anyone getting clapped, actually. Except maybe the audience's wallets. Yeah, not particularly fond of this story. It's just kind of boring. It's too long for what it is. They could have easily cut this down to 3 or 4 issues tops. And it really should have gone into some of Wolverine's military training and stuff like that. I can't believe I went through this entire story where Logan has bone claws and didn't make a single boner joke. I must really be growing as a person. I'm sure you can find a Wolverine Origins motion comic here on YouTube if you're super interested, or curious, or just think I'm wrong. And you could probably find it in a used bin in any bookstore in the world for like $5-6. There's 4 or 5 different editions of this book. You can find it. Not that I really recommend wasting your time with it. Just watch the first 5 minutes of X-Men Origins Wolverine, turn the movie off immediately after, and you get the best parts of both stories without having to sit through the entire length of either of them. And we all get to have a Merry Christmas. Remember those horror movies from the early 2000s? The ones like Hostel and Wrong Turn that were a little too infatuated with torture? This is basically one of those stories in comic book form. It's probably right in that borderline of pure body horror when we just see how mutilated Wolverine's body gets during this story. And this is another one of those tales where he's more of a side character. The three main characters being the scientists working on the Weapon X project, a man only known as the Professor, who is an agent of an unseen third party, a sadist who loves seeing Logan suffer over the course of the experiment, just a little weasel of a man with delusions of grandeur, who Wolverine just dreams of killing the entire story, since he is physically incapable of acting. Then there's Dr. Cornelius, who seems like a pretty normal guy. You can tell he's definitely putting his emotions in the back seat over the course of the project, and he's the real brains behind the psychological reprogramming Wolverine is experiencing. But you also have to remember that this is the 80s version of science fiction, so all scientists are good at every field of science. So he's basically just Dr. Science Man who can do everything. And then there's Dr. Hines, who seems to be the best of the three. She's the only one who actively states that what they're doing to Logan is wrong. The one whose conscience is definitely bothering her the most. She's the chief technician of the project. She's the one who typically monitors Logan's bio levels and adds the substances to his system to keep him sedated. She's the one who monitored the binding process of the adamantium as it attached itself to Logan's skeleton. And she rarely refers to him as Weapon X. She always calls him Logan. She just refuses to dehumanize him the way the other two scientists have, often to her own detriment. And in the simulation where Wolverine thinks he's breaking out and slaughtering the staff, she is the only person Logan outright refuses to kill. Although the only reason he kills Dr. Cornelius is because he drops an assault rifle and accidentally fires at Logan. So really, he only killed Cornelius because he was provoked. You guys gotta understand, this story was incredibly violent in its time. This was towards the end of the Reign of Tyranny that was the Comics Code Authority era of comic books, where a bunch of busybody housewives and teachers were basically policing what could and couldn't be published. And for better or worse, both Marvel and DC noticed that they could appeal to an older audience as well, tackling more violent stories and complicated themes. And while in the in-universe timeline this predates the Chris Claremont, Frank Miller Wolverine story, it came out quite a few years after that, and sort of evolves the theme of the duality of Wolverine being man and beast, and adds that element of nature versus technology into him as well, leaving readers with the question of where does the violent killer begin and end? Was he always like that, or was it part of Weapon X's tampering? I mean, he did fight in 2 world wars, so I would say it's safe to assume he's always had that killing edge inside of him. The Weapon X mental manipulation just honed that edge, and it took a long time for Charles Xavier to basically restore Logan's free will. But as much as I want to recommend this story, I am having a hard time doing that in good faith, because the artwork is very busy and can kind of hurt the eye if you aren't used to this style of art. It's very jargon heavy, and like I said earlier, the main character of Wolverine takes a back seat. You have to be really invested in Wolverine as a character to get anything out of this story, in my opinion. But this was a one-man project, pretty much all done by Barry Windsor Smith, both penciling the art and writing the story itself. And in my opinion, he did a great job. I just think you need to have a bit more of a backlog of Wolverine or X-Men reading before giving this a shot. This is the deep lore, boys. Deep lore. Alright boys, now this is the place to get started if you're new to Wolverine. Chris Claremont and Frank Miller working together on one of my favorite characters. Chris Claremont being one of the best X-Men writers of all time, possibly the best. And Frank Miller being the guy you call when you need to breathe life back into a dying character. This right here, my friends, was a match made in heaven. Although I should probably make it clear that Wolverine was not dying at all in popularity at this point. But the miniseries we're talking about was sort of the test run for solo Wolverine comics. And I have to say, this is Frank Miller's art at its absolute best. And while Chris Claremont is credited as being the writer of this story, he admits himself that Frank Miller offered more than a few ideas that made it into the final project. I don't want to sound like I'm diminishing Chris Claremont's role in this at all. He's a very talented writer in his own right. But I mean, look at this face. How can I not say Frank Miller is the best? If you told me that Robert Englund and Frank Miller were long-lost brothers, I would 100% believe you. Now, from a surface level, the story is kinda hokey. It's Wolverine fighting ninjas in Japan. But at its core, it's a story about self-actualization and personal sacrifice. A man coming to terms with what he is and what he has to do for the woman he loves, even if it means costing him her love. There's also themes of honor, familial responsibility, the culture clash of loving somebody from the other side of the world, and the fear you can have of showing the person you love the worst side of yourself. And for Wolverine, it's the fact that he's a hardened killer. This is after his time working with Weapon X and Special Forces. The story even touches on elements of domestic violence, which is also the product of Mariko Ishida's sense of familial responsibility, literally being crushed under the expectations of her father in a forced marriage she didn't want to be a part of, while begging the man she actually loves not to interfere because it could cause problems with her family. Like, there's some genuinely adult stuff being talked about here, and not in the condescending way a lot of modern writers like to do. Nobody goes on any long-winded speeches. The writer respects your intelligence enough to know that these things are bad. No lectures, just one equal talking to another through an artistic medium. This is what being an artist is all about, in my opinion. And the story starts off with Wolverine hunting down a rogue grizzly bear, a legitimate man-eater that was driven mad by a poisoned arrow stuck in its back, hammering home the duality of Logan as a character, identifying with the beast while understanding that it's dangerous and has to be destroyed, and yet still seeking out revenge on behalf of the bear for the poacher that put an arrow in its back. He understands that because the beast is dangerous to people, it has to be killed, but also understands it was provoked into becoming dangerous in the first place. So when he goes to Japan and is treated like an animal, it's not coming out of nowhere. It's already been established that Wolverine has a kindred spirit with beasts, without requiring prior knowledge of the character. So while a story that on its surface level is about a Japanese crime lord becoming the kingpin of Tokyo, that crime lord being Mariko's father, turns out to be a story about a man accepting both sides of himself, the beast and the man. It's good stuff with clean, simple-to-read art. It's not just one of the entry-level Wolverine stories I recommend, it's probably one of the easiest stories to recommend anyone just starting to get into comic books. Wolverine is the most popular of the X-Men characters. He's pretty well known by comic book fandom outsiders as well. And this story is so self-contained from the rest of the Marvel universe that you can read it entirely as a one-off and never read another story. And you would probably still walk away 100% satisfied with it. There's a reason why people still talk about this story decades later. It was also the inspiration behind the film The Wolverine, the film that temporarily saved the X-Men film franchise before the Dark Phoenix movie ruined everything. 20th Century Fox went out of business and got bought out by Disney. And I think it's because of this story that I always think of the John Byrne suit whenever I think of Wolverine, the brown and tan second costume Logan ever had. I get why old heads tend to lean towards the classic blue and yellow, but for me, Logan's definitive look has always been the John Byrne suit. And if you don't like that, you can go ahead and leave a complaint in the complaint box. Please do, I am dying for engagement. I'm also willing to die on the hill that Mariko Yoshida is Wolverine's ultimate love interest. Their character arcs in this story complement each other so well, as by the end she comes to terms with the fact that she doesn't have to be used like a pawn, that her father had already dishonored their family, and that it was her responsibility to now restore that honor by learning to stand on her own 2 feet, and not accept the weight of other people's expectations and responsibilities to weigh her down. It's a shame things never really worked out between the two. Alright, now we're really getting into controversial territory, with Mark Millar's Wolverine Enemy of the State. Mark Millar is not at all related to Frank Miller. That's why I'm emphasizing the AR in his name instead of ER. And he's often written off as sort of a discount Garth Ennis. He's one of those guys, when he's left to his own devices, his stories typically end up just being gross. but I always felt like when he was filtered through the editorial staff of DC or Marvel, he could make a good work every now and then. And I would say the Enemy of the State and Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. story arcs of Wolverine are pretty good. And I have to say, this is probably the best of John Romita Jr.'s art I've ever seen. He had definitely come a long way since his days working on Daredevil the Man Without Fear. And that art wasn't even bad, it was just in need of a little more refinement. Not that I can really talk, my arthritis is so bad I don't even think I can hold a pencil anymore. Anyway, the story arc also introduced a villain known as the Gorgon. He led a doomsday cult of mutants in Japan known as the Dawn of the White Light. He was resurrected and served as a member of the Hand, and for a short period of time, he was the leader of Hydra. And we haven't even touched on how many powers this guy has. Here's the list. Telepathy, the ability to turn people to stone by making eye contact. Enhanced strength, enhanced speed, enhanced reflexes, regeneration, and superhuman durability. This guy feels like a fanfiction character, but at the same time, he's so cool I kinda want to give him a pass. And it genuinely feels like he was only meant to be a one-off character because he dies at the end of this. Like, it almost feels like it was a joke that he was this powerful. And there's also the fact that he was only going after street-level heroes because he still wasn't strong enough to go against the Marvel Universe's heavy hitters. Like, I'm pretty sure the Gorgon wouldn't have actually won a fight against somebody like Spider-Man, let alone a hand-to-hand combat veteran like Captain America. Although Spider-Man is quite a bit stronger than Captain America, so maybe I should have used those two in the opposite order. The point is, the Gorgon is really cool and really edgy, and I find him both hilarious and genuinely interesting as a villain. And his goal is to literally eradicate all life on Earth. You cannot get more edgy fanfiction than that, and it's so great. It's dumb, and it's great, and it's dumb, and it's great. So the TLDR for this story is that Wolverine is captured by both the Hand and Hydra, supposedly killed and resurrected, but they never really explain how they were able to kill Wolverine in the first place. Mind controlled to be Hydra's pawn, with the sole intention of killing street-level heroes so they can be resurrected into an army of superhumans. And basically steal technology from Reed Richards to be repurposed into doomsday weapons. Because Hydra and the Hand are working together and want to eradicate all life on Earth. At the very least, all human life. If you told me Mark Millar was a regular on Reddit, I would believe you. And the two main heroes of this story are Wolverine, obviously, and Elektra. I mean, it's pretty hard to tell a story about the Hand without her being involved in it. And over the course of the story, Wolverine does rack up a pretty impressive body count. In the first part of the story, when he's being mind-controlled, he kills over 400 agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. They are just nameless, faceless goons that get killed off by the dozens anyway, but it's still pretty impressive. The only named character he kills is an X-Man named Northstar, who, I'll admit, I really don't know anything about. My interest in the X-Men begins and ends with Wolverine, I'll be honest. The Hand also sends Wolverine after Daredevil, but they've been trying to get a hold of him for years at this point. Basically since the Frank Miller run back in the 80s. But it was also seen as more of a bonus objective. The main purpose of this fight was to act as a distraction so the Gorgon could go after Elektra. Because she's just destined to be the Queen of the Hand, and that's just something you have to deal with. I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. And whether you love Mark Miller or hate him, you have to admit he understands Wolverine as a character pretty well. Even when he's under mind control and committing all these atrocities, he'll just stop and take time to pet a stray dog. Wolverine having his well-known affinity for animals, especially canines. The story can be a bit messy and a bit fanficky at times, but it has its moments. And honestly, the cheese factor is part of the reason why I would recommend this book. It just requires a bit more knowledge of the Marvel Universe to really enjoy it. Like when Logan goes after the X-Men, Jean Grey isn't around, but her and Cyclops' future daughter is. And you just kind of have to accept the fact that the X-Men's children time travel back to meet them a lot, specifically Scott Summers' children. Anyway, Wolverine is defeated by the X-Men and Captain America, where he is then captured by S.H.I.E.L.D. and restored to his free will. And it's also pointed out that the American government had a hand in the Weapon X program to begin with. So Elektra basically tells Nick Fury that turnabout is fair play. They turned Wolverine into the adamantium monster he is now, and somebody else just reprogrammed him to use him against them. This was before the retcon that Romulus was behind the Weapon X program the whole time. Did I mention Marvel retcons can be pretty messy sometimes? And when Wolverine is back fighting on the side of the good guys, we get to see him hijack 3 reprogrammed Sentinels and use them to commit war crimes. All of which are going to come back eventually. Death is a minor hindrance in comic books. Oh, and when Elektra is resurrected by the Hand, it turns out that they've brought her back so many times they can no longer mind control her. And she was just pretending to be possessed and killing innocent people the whole time. Well, I guess she wasn't pretending to kill anybody. A lot of people died because of her. But it's okay, because she's a badass ninja lady and everybody says she's hot. She just lines to me, man. All of this eventually leads us into the final battle between Wolverine and the Gorgon, and it is long and brutal. It started off as a 2-on-1 with Wolverine and Elektra fighting the Gorgon together, but since Elektra was the only one in this fight who couldn't heal, she got taken out by the end of the first round. And I mean, no matter what Logan does to this guy, he does not stay down. He basically tackles the Gorgon through a skylight, causing him to land on the back of his head and neck. And he just gets up and keeps fighting like it's nothing. I get that he's a walking corpse, he's already a pretty powerful mutant, but damn man, this is brutal. The only other fight off the top of my head that I can think of that comes close to this is that time the Green Lantern villain Sinestro fought 2 of the human Green Lanterns at the same time, when none of them had access to their power rings. So it was Hal Jordan, the Silver Age Green Lantern, and Kyle Rayner, the Green Lantern from the 1990s, fighting the main Green Lantern villain Sinestro in unarmed combat in a construction site where all good fights take place. Completely unrelated to this, but it was a fight that was on the same scale of brutality. I guess what I'm saying is don't sleep on this story if it sounds interesting to you. Read the Chris Claremont, Frank Miller Wolverine story first. Maybe watch a couple of episodes of X-Men 97, and you could probably jump into this one without any real problems. The first half of this story could have been ended really quickly if they had just asked Spider-Man for help. His webbing is so strong that it's able to restrain weaker versions of the Hulk. He's beaten Wolverine in multiple fights over the years. His spider sense basically makes it impossible for anyone to ambush him. Like, he was the guy S.H.I.E.L.D. should have called and asked for a hand here. But I guess that would have caused the story to end too quickly. Also, there's a scene in this story where the Gorgon deflects bullets with his samurai sword. I don't really have any witty or insightful commentary on this action. I just thought if I didn't show you, it would be a shame. And I can imagine back in like 2009 when this was printed, I would have been cheering at how cool this was. And while it still gets an emotional reaction out of me as an adult, I more find it funny than awesome. It's such a relic of its time, and it's so great in that nostalgic way, if that makes any sense. It's just enough past the everything has to be a Matrix reference boom period, but not completely out of that era, if you catch my cold. It also kind of reminds me of a scene of Virgil doing something similar in Devil May Cry 3. There's a weeb reference for you. Everybody clap and laugh at how stunning and brave I am. Have you ever seen the Clint Eastwood classic film Unforgiven? Because Old Man Logan is basically that, just replacing a gunfighter with the claw guy. And if you haven't seen this movie, shame on you. But here's a quick summary anyway. The protagonist is a man named William Money. He used to be an outlaw, but he turned over a new leaf to raise a family. And after the death of his last true friend, he goes back to his violent ways and gets revenge against Gene Hackman, a corrupt sheriff. It's the classic pacifist breaking their oath of pacifism type story. I'm sure at least 5 examples popped into your head right now. Something happened to Wolverine during the villain uprising apocalypse that caused him to never pop his claws again. More than that, he vowed to never raise his fists again. And since we're talking about a guy with an adamantium skeleton, a regular punch from him would do a hell of a lot to your face. For some of you, it might even be an improvement. Kyle. So Logan and his new family live under the rule of the Incredible Hulk. He ended up switching sides during the final war between heroes and villains. The story says it was because the gamma radiation basically eroded away Bruce Banner's mind over the years. And you have to remember, this was before they made Hulk magic with the cosmic devil being the real source of his powers. He was just a sci-fi radiation monster back in these times. So back then it made sense. Plus, there was something of a precedent of future evil Hulks at the time, like the Maestro, but that's not really important to this story. I also want to make it apparent that I am only covering the original Old Man Logan story, the one written by Mark Millar, although I should note that it's technically no longer a non-canon story, because the Old Man Logan character temporarily replaced Wolverine in the mainline universe. So it's a possible future alternate timeline Wolverine who is canon to mainline Marvel, not just a hypothetical what-if story anymore. The original Old Man Logan story is very much a road trip as well. Logan and Hawkeye are traveling across this post-apocalyptic America, Wolverine living as a dirt farmer, Hawkeye as an illicit substance smuggler, two former superheroes reduced to a shadow of what they once were, crushed beneath the heels of the villains they used to beat on a daily basis. And let me tell you, the sights these guys come across are pretty spectacular. Sights like the resting place of Thor's hammer, a tourist attraction and site of pilgrimage where people pray for the superheroes to return, and some brave few attempt to lift Mjolnir in order to claim the powers of Thor. Then there's the Midwest, where dinosaurs imported from the Badlands were dumped by their irresponsible owners, one of which gets possessed by the Venom symbiote. There's the kind of nice region run by Emma Frost and Doctor Doom, where Logan is informed that there hasn't been a new mutant born in 40 years, meaning that the odds of new superpowered individuals coming to save this world are next to zero. And towards the end of the story, we find out that they weren't actually hauling party favors, but super soldier serum. Hawkeye believed he was working with an underground network of rebels on the East Coast, and hoped that the super soldier serum would allow a superhero resistance to form against the Red Skull. But since Hawkeye is now blind, he didn't notice that the guy he made the deal with had this funny little mustache. He must be a big fan of Charlie Chaplin. Nope, he works for the Red Skull. And he says bye-bye to Hawkeye and makes him Hawk die. Thank you for the laughter, I'll be here all week. And takes the body of Hawkeye and what he believes to be the body of Logan to his boss, the Red Skull, who is cosplaying as Captain America. Something ritualistic wearing of the skin of a dead enemy. It doesn't end very well for him. You see, Logan only took this job to pay the rent for his family, under the condition that he would take no part in any violence over the course of the journey. And I would like to note here that Logan's son is named Scotty, a reference to the real name of Cyclops, which is Scott Summers, showing that despite their differences and their mutual love for the same woman, he had a lot of respect for his former team leader. And surprise, surprise, Logan is married to another redhead. If it isn't Japanese women, it's redheads with this guy. At least he's consistent. And through a combination of anger at the loss of his last friend, and fear of what will happen to his family if he doesn't get the money, Wolverine finally breaks his vow of pacifism, fighting the Red Skull with the weapon of the man he respected most in this world, Steve Rogers, giving the Red Skull a very, very close shave. Now, this is the part of the story that's just gross for the sake of shock value, but the Hulk's forces in his territory are made up of his inbred offspring, the first generation of which being the children of Bruce Banner and his cousin Jennifer Walters, also known as the She-Hulk. And it's implied that Bruce has been having children with his own children. Yeah, this is why Mark Millar has the reputation that he has. They're brutal, sadistic cannibals from the mountains like The Hills Have Eyes, which had been remade around this time period, so I guess it's fitting. And they kill Logan's family earlier than the rent is due, all because Bruce Banner was bored and wanted his old rival back, harkening back to Wolverine's first appearance in a Hulk comic book. And Wolverine hunts down and eliminates Bruce Banner's family down to pretty much their last member. If I remember correctly, he lets one other Hulk live who didn't have anything to do with the murder of his family, so there might be a handful of Banners still out there. And it all boils down to one final confrontation between Logan and the big man himself, who can now tap into the strength of the Hulk in his base form. Don't ask me how that's possible. But the silly goose, halfway through the fight, he gets really, really hungry and mistakes Wolverine for a snack pack. I mean, sometimes when you eat something that's capable of regenerating, you end up with superpowers like Grom the Paunch. but other times you end up with a really, really bad stomachache. The kind of stomachache you just don't get better from. And the story ends showing that Wolverine actually stole the last of the Hulk babies, who he plans to raise like a son to help him save the world from the supervillains. The ones who are still standing after the infighting started when all the heroes were dead. Implying that any continuation of this story would be like a post-apocalyptic lone wolf and cub. And unfortunately, that's not the continuation we got. What we got was a steaming pile of doo-doo. Now, I know what those of you who never read this story are wondering. Mr. Green Skeleton Man, how come Wolverine doesn't want to pop his claws anymore? What could have possibly happened to our guy that he just doesn't want to fight anymore? He's Wolverine. He was born to fight. Well, that's simple, my friends. You see, the Spider-Man villain Captain Fishbowl pulled a fast one on our guy Logan. When he thought he was fighting an army of supervillains, somehow managing to one-shot heavy hitters like Omega Red and Mr. Sinister, he was actually turning the X-Men into ground beef, meaning one villain was able to eliminate one of the most powerful superhero teams on Marvel's Earth in a single night using one of their own members. Since when can Mysterio fabricate sense to disorient somebody like Wolverine or Daredevil? I don't know, but that's what happened. So Mysterio says it was just a prank, bro, and fucks off. But Wolverine took the prank very seriously. So seriously that the silly goose tried to kiss a freight train. And sat around moping for the next 50 years instead of trying to redeem himself by fighting in the final battle of Las Vegas with what remained of the superheroes. All jokes aside, Logan was completely heartbroken. He basically slaughtered every friend he ever had in this world, and was just desperately trying to find a way to end his own suffering. Maybe it was in bad taste to try to add some levity to that, but it's just comic books. It's not like real people got hurt in the making of this. Or did they? Oh, and there was also a gang of Ghost Rider LARPers called the Ghost Riders because they're very original. I don't know how they keep their motorcycles on fire. That seems like that would be more trouble than it's worth. And it's probably not very good for the tires in the long run, honestly. And I don't see many tire factories this far west. But, that's what they're gonna do, I guess. Now here's the question. Would I recommend Old Man Logan? Definitely not for first-time readers. Definitely not for anyone under the age of 15, 16 or so. I don't know, how old are you allowed to start watching horror movies these days? Like, what's the socially acceptable number? I was like 12 when I started watching Friday the 13th movies, and those are pretty tame by today's standards. You should be an adult if you're watching these videos, so go ahead and read it if you want to. If you have kids, keep this one away from them. But if you're fine with seeing grotesque scenes of violence and just the not safe for life subject matter of where the Hulk family comes from, then sure, add this to your reading list. Just, don't continue with the series after this one. Trust me, it's not worth it. I wasted way too much time and money on those issues, just hoping they would get better. And they never did. Oh boy. Man, I suck at conclusions, don't I? I have been struggling on how to end this video for like 2 or 3 days at this point. I hope I've done a good enough job illustrating why Wolverine is such a beloved character, not just by me, but by the greater comic book readership as a whole. He is Marvel's best utility character in their roster. You can throw him into pretty much any story or setting as a solo act. You can throw him onto pretty much any superhero team to lend them some credibility. TV shows, movies, video games, even the bad ones people are gonna at least look at. In my opinion, he is second only to Spider-Man. And the only reason Iron Man may have surpassed him in the last few years was because of Robert Downey Jr.'s performance. As soon as Marvel stops making Iron Man movies with Robert Downey Jr., the character will fade back into the D-list. But that's besides the point. I hope I've given you some good ideas of what to read if you're into comics. If not, thanks for watching anyway. Do me a favor and leave a like if you liked the video. Maybe leave a poop emoji just so I know you watched it all the way to the end. You guys have a good one, you hear?